Hello, Northlanders. It's Dan Williamson. Earlier this month, the Superior Telegram released its 29th episode of Archive Dive, which is a monthly history podcast where we dive into the archives of historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County. If you haven't checked out Archive Dive yet, I highly encourage you to do so. You can find episodes at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to this podcast. For this month's episode, Telegram reporter Maria Lockwood is joined by Brianna Fine, curator of collections at the Richard I. Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, as they discuss a search for a piece of Richard I. Bong's story, the Marge plane. The Poplar man became America's ace of aces for downing 40 enemy aircraft during World War II, which is the most by any U.S. pilot to date. The plane was named for Marjorie Marge Vatndal, Bong's girlfriend, who later became his wife. His most iconic plane was one that he only flew for 3 months before it crashed in Papua New Guinea 80 years ago. As you may have heard, an expedition recently discovered the crash site of the P-38 Lightning Marge plane. Here is a clip from the episode.
What makes this particular plane so important?
Well, I think that this plane is the most famous fighter plane out of World War II. It belonged to Richard Bong, who is the top fighter pilot of the war. So there is no more important pilot or plane from that era. And then you add on that he had this nose art on there of his girlfriend, and it was a very sweet little portrait. The press really loved that, and they ran with that. And I think that's why the Marge plane got so famous so quickly, is because the press loved the sort of the innocence and the sweetness of that nose art, and publicized it pretty widely. So even though he didn't actually fly that plane for that long, it became a very famous plane.
Again, you can find that episode at superiortelegram.com or wherever you also get this podcast. I'll also put a link in the show notes. Look for the next episode of Archive Dive to drop on Wednesday, July 10th. In case you missed last month's episode, I'm resharing it here. In May, Maria and local historian and retired librarian Teddie Meronek dove into the history of the Blatnik, Bong, and Oliver bridges in an episode titled The Bridges of Douglas County. I encourage you to take a listen, and when you're done, click the link in our show notes to find more episodes of Archive Dive.
Hello, and welcome to Archive Dive. I'm Maria Lockwood, a reporter with the Superior Telegram. Each month, we dip into files on historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County with local historians. Today, we dig into the history of what you could call the bridges of Douglas County. The Blatnik Bridge, originally named the High Bridge, opened in 1961. An estimated 3,000 people from both sides gathered at the main span for the opening ceremony. Over the years, the bridge has been renamed, widened, and reinforced. It is currently slated to be replaced, funded in part by the largest grant the federal government has ever awarded. The Bong Bridge opened to traffic in 1984 for a construction cost of $70 million, longer than the Blatnik Bridge by 425 feet. The bridge replaced the 1927-era Arrowhead Bridge. There's also the Oliver Bridge, which dates back to 1910. Helping us dive into the story today is local historian Teddie Meronek. Hi, Teddie.
Hi, Maria.
Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, I'm glad to be back.
Wonderful. So I'm going to let you decide. Are we going to start with the most newsworthy or the oldest?
Well, I do have a soft place in my heart for the Oliver Bridge, so I think we should start with that one.
All right, let's start with the Oliver Bridge, which has withstood since 1910?
1910. It's seen every other one of its contemporaries going to be by the wayside, because when the Blatnik comes down, there's another one. But it started out because of the steel plant in Duluth. That's how the Oliver Bridge evolved. And in fact, when it was first built, there wasn't even an Oliver yet. It hadn't been incorporated as a village.
So what was the bridge called?
It was either called the Steel Plant Bridge or the Spirit Lake Bridge.
Oh, okay.
And I always found it as a child the most terrifying ride that you could take between Duluth and Superior.
Really? Why?
Because it was wood on the bottom. You know, it wasn't concrete at that time. They had done since then they've done upgrades on it. So it was just wood. And then when you would drive over, it would be that sensation of being on the wood. And then if you happen to be lucky enough to drive over it when there was a train going on above you, going past above you, it was an experience you don't soon forget.
I bet. I mean,
Yeah.
even today, the trains still go above.
Yeah. And I think what people forget about the Oliver Bridge is when we had other bridges, when we had the Interstate Bridge, that was taken out of use by accidents a couple times when ships ran into it. So the only way, if you wanted to go on a bridge between Duluth and Superior, was to go out to Oliver.
Oh, okay.
Which for a lot of years wasn't easy because the road between Superior and Oliver was so bad.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I suppose at one point
Yeah.
it had to be not a great road, but
Yeah.
with it being a highway now, that's nice.
It's a long way around, too.
It is. That's a lot out of your way.
But the only other way when the interstate was the bridge that people went across because it was built in 1897, and that was the first time you could really go across the water on a bridge. But that had multiple accidents where boats would run into it for whatever reason, either pilot error or something had happened with the people who were operating the bridge. So that took it out of commission. That left you with the options of if you needed to get to Duluth, maybe you could take a train across, or they had ferries that could go across. But when the accident happened, I think in 1904, when the steamer Troy hit the bridge, it was out of commission for 2 years.
Oh, my word. Okay.
And other than the Oliver, that was the only bridge that would take vehicles across the water.
Okay.
So,
We have to back up then to the Interstate Bridge. When that one went in, you said?
1897.
1897. And it was right across the harbor, right?
It was from Connors Point to Rice's Point, and it was called the Steel Wedding.
The Steel Wedding?
Duluth and Superior meeting there in the middle of the bridge.
Okay.
And it was a big, very big deal. And the mayors of Superior and Duluth met in the middle of the bridge and shook hands when it was being dedicated.
Okay.
But it seems like Superior did not finish their access to the bridge right on time, and they had a little scuffle there. I think involved union employees and other people. And this happened right before the bridge dedication, but they finally did get it finished so that people could access the bridge from Connors Point. But yeah, it's always interesting. And that was a toll bridge, and they charged, I think, in the beginning, like 10 cents for horse and cart, But I think it was 10 cents if you were bringing your oxen across the bridge too. And they were 10 cents. People were only 5 cents if you were a pedestrian.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you were in a vehicle, did they count you also, or was it just the vehicle or the horse?
It would be like the vehicle and the driver. That's how it was later on. It was, I think, 15 cents later on for a vehicle and a driver, and then 5 cents for everyone else who was in the automobile or the truck. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean,
it started to add up after a while.
Right. You got to hide everyone under blankets in the back seat or something so you can get across.
Well, the thing about these bridges, these toll bridges, is that they weren't owned by the state or the city. They were privately owned.
Really?
The Interstate Bridge was built by the two states, but then it was sold to the Great Northern because there were railroad tracks going across the bridge also. And at one time, I think streetcar tracks too. And so that's what the tolls were for, I suppose, because a company owned it. They had to make money to maintain it.
Right.
And that was it with the Arrowhead Bridge, too. They also had tolls on that bridge, but they were privately owned by a group of investors from Superior who paid for it to be built. So they charged tolls, making back their money and taking care of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that bridge ran from the Billings Point area, right?
Yeah.
Similar to where the Bong Bridge is
now.
now.
It's almost the exact footprint of where the Bong Bridge is now.
But it was a much lower bridge, right?
Yeah. And it was also wood, except for the center. When it opened up, the center plates there, they were metal. And when it was dedicated, I ran across a story. I just love this. The replica of the Leif Erikson ship went through it. They were the first ship to go through the open bridge.
Wow.
I think that's kind of interesting.
Definitely.
But I think the company was called the Arrowhead Bridge Company. And I think I read somewhere that Morgan Murphy, who owned the Telegram at the time, was one of the investors. And they kept it until the High Bridge happened because they weren't going to make any more money on tolls. People could go across for free, and they sold it to the two states then. They sold it to Wisconsin and Minnesota, and Wisconsin paid a little more because they owned more of the land.
Okay.
And Minnesota didn't have to pay as much, but they had to maintain it, both
Okay.
of them.
Now, when did the interstate shut down?
They shut down right when the Blatnik Bridge opened.
Okay. So,
But they stayed there for another 10 years. The bridge was actually there. I'm sure it was still used. I don't know
By
if it
the
was still
railroad?
used by the railroad or not, but it was still there. But nobody was going to go across that after this super duper new bridge is built.
what do you do with the bridge then? How did they take it apart and,
They blew some of it up, I believe. The
Okay.
center, because it turned.
Right?
It didn't open, it turned. And I think that was concrete. I
Mhm.
think they blew that part up.
Okay.
But they left, in fact, it's still down there because it's a fishing pier. Half of it, or part of it, is still down in the water.
Okay.
But after I've researched all of these things, it's amazing that any of these bridges ever got built
Why?
because of the red tape. And I think the Blatnik is the one that made me believe that it's almost impossible to do this in a timely fashion of building a bridge because there's so many people coming at it with their own wishes
Their own agendas.
and to get a consensus, because in the Blatnik's case, you not only had the federal government because they were giving the big bucks,
Mhm.
you had Wisconsin and Minnesota, and then you had the two cities who all had their own agendas. And reading through it, it was very contentious for many, many years about, are we going to get this bridge done? This is what I want. This is what I want.
Oh.
And then you've got the feds saying, well, we're going to tell you what you want.
Mhm. You're going to do it our way
Yeah.
because we're paying for it.
But it just went on and on and on and on. And when I count the years, I think you can start in about 1946 and, by 61, you've got it built.
Wow.
But the Bong went on for a long time too, but there wasn't it wasn't animosity, but this disagreement about so many things.
What were the different things that they were envisioning for the bridge? Well, how did they differ so much?
Well, I think for the Blatnik, what struck me the most was how Superior could not decide where they wanted that bridge. The feds and I think Duluth thought it should feed to Hammond. Hammond should be the entryway. But there were very, very, very many people in Superior who wanted it on Tower.
Oh, interesting.
And that discussion and that disagreement lasted almost to the very end. And then there's other people who thought maybe, and I think there were many people in Superior who thought maybe we should actually be building a tunnel between the two cities rather than a bridge.
I had seen some newspaper articles about that. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
wondering if that might be a better route.
Right. And that had first popped up in the 30s when they started thinking about another new bridge between Duluth and Superior instead of the interstate. And one of the things was, yes, a tunnel would be great. And I think I don't really want to travel in a tunnel, but it was, it was brought up again with the Blatnik. But the big thing was in Superior was that if Hammond was the street that was going to feed to the bridge, there have to be changes to Hammond. And there was one newspaper article that described Hammond Avenue as the most beautiful street in Wisconsin because of the boulevards.
Oh.
And there were people who were adamantly against that because of those boulevards. And I think of it now and I wonder if they had elm trees on those boulevards, if it would have, the
Mhm.
fight would have been in vain because they would have all been gone. But I don't know what kind of trees they had on the boulevards. But it went down to about 1958 and there were some organizations in Superior that were so fed up with this constant, argument about where is it going to be? Is it going to be Tower or Hammond? And I think it was the Association of Commerce who put an article in the paper and said, quit talking, start building.
Right.
And they'd had enough. And everybody agreed finally that it was going to be Hammond Avenue. So by 1958, they started.
And is that the reason the boulevards were taken out of Hammond Avenue?
I believe so, because they thought there was going to be so much traffic and they did, I guess, interrupt the flow of traffic, I suppose.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that's why they were taken out. They weren't taken out till the 60s, though.
Okay. Interesting, because
Yeah.
they're looking at a rebuilding part of Hammond this summer and next summer, and they're looking at putting boulevards back
Right. Yeah. It's funny how things come in and out of favor.
in. Yes, it is.
And I really think that they thought this bridge was going to benefit Superior more than it would benefit Duluth.
Why?
They thought that because it was such an easy access that more Duluthians would be coming over here and maybe they decided they want to live here
Oh, okay.
and that Superior shouldn't worry about. People didn't want to go to Duluth because there are so many traffic jams and all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in a way it was just the opposite. It did benefit Duluth more than it does us. And because you look at what Superior was like just before the bridge was built and all the businesses that were here, and it was like everything then went over the bridge because they had the big box stores, the early big box stores like Gold Finds and Shopper City, and now it was very easy to get over there. Right. And I don't know if that was it, and if the Miller Hill Mall just
helped pick up the pace there,
helped this go on, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, despite how contentious it was, it seems like it was a big deal when the Blatnik Bridge opened. And it was not called the Blatnik Bridge at that point, was it?
No, it was just the High Bridge. And that was another bone of contention between the two cities.
Oh, no.
Because they waited 10 years until they named it after John Blatnik. And if you do read about Blatnik, you do know that he was very instrumental in that bridge. I don't know if it would have gotten built without John Blatnik because he was on the House's Public Works Committee, and he eventually became chairman of that. And so he was the one who was always there telling the feds, you have to do this because, we're building this interstate highway system. This is going to be a great link between the two states, blah, 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 blah. And he really pushed it. But people in Superior were very hurt.
Because he was from Minnesota.
He was from Minnesota, and this was a joint project. I mean, 80% of the money came from the feds, but each state paid 10%. And so people in Superior were very upset. They had thought it should have remained the Twin Ports High Bridge.
Oh.
But, I look at it now after reading about Blatnik, and I think, well, he really did. He did do more than his share. So, But then 20 years later, you've got the Bong Bridge, where there was not even any discussion about, people not liking that. You're going to name this bridge after Richard I. Bong. It was announced by the city councils of Duluth and Superior. This is going to be the name. And you never heard anything else about that.
Well, that's because he kind of transcends because he is America's ace of aces.
Right. Yeah. And I read something that Bruce Hagen, who was mayor at the time, it's funny, the Hagens were both mayors when his dad, Larry Hagen, was mayor when the Blatnik was dedicated. And then Bruce was mayor when the Bong was dedicated. But he said, I want people, every time you drive over this bridge, I want you to think about how it was built. And he said, I don't mean construction, because it was named after a World War II hero. And he wanted people to think, this is what we're remembering with this bridge. We're remembering this man and everyone else who served this country during World War II. So I thought that was nice. But it is funny that they were both mayors when the two, these two big, And
Blatnik served in World War II also.
He did, yes, he did. Yeah.
So both of them are named after World War II veterans.
And I'm interested to find out what they'll do when the new bridge opens. Will it retain the same name or will they rename it?
Yeah, that's a question. Did you research much about how you even build such a thing? How do you go about building a bridge when all that's underneath it is water?
Well, I know for the Bong, they started I don't know how many years ahead was taking core samples out in the water to see where you're going to be able to place all these things that you need, to have people drive over it. It's amazing. I think they spent almost a year on the Blatnik just designing the bridge. And then 2 years building it, which to me seems really fast, but obviously these people know what they're doing. But when you think about it, you're not only building it in the water, but you're building it in these two communities that the weather is not always the best.
Right.
And they did it in a timely manner. And in those days you had no safety harnesses, or people weren't wearing safety harnesses when they built that bridge. And I read that they had a boat in the harbor all the time circulating around because if anybody fell off, they could rescue them.
For the Blatnik Bridge?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I assume by the time the Bong Bridge came along, there were safety harnesses and it was much more safe. Were there any fatalities at either of those sites?
Well, there were 3 on the Blatnik, and I think I read someplace that the only accident on the Bong was someone broke their finger.
Okay, so very different.
Yeah, and they're the same height, the two bridges, yeah. And I did not know that the Bong Bridge is as long as the San Francisco Bay Bridge.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and it's the longer of the two.
Yeah.
Just by a little bit.
Yeah, I think at the time the Blatnik Bridge was the biggest construction project in either Minnesota or Wisconsin.
Right. And I read that it was initially they expected to have the peak traffic would be 14,000 vehicles across it. And then currently gets 33,000.
Yeah. And we're lucky enough at the Superior Public Library to have Lawrence Hagen's notes from the early days of this bridge, because he was serving in the Wisconsin Assembly and he was on the committee for this from that time.
Mm-hmm.
And not only do we have his notes, we have, correspondence about, the early talks about the bridge, but also these wonderful photographs. I mean, if you want to see just magnificent photographs, either page through the telegram or, there's places like VIP in Superior, they have a huge blown up photograph of the bridge. Those are fascinating how these people built this.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite picture is of the two men when they put in the beam, the high beam above the Blatnik Bridge. The two men, one from Wisconsin and one from Minnesota, got together in the center of the bridge and shook hands because the two cities were now united with this beam.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you sent me an article showing a bunch of people on the bridge. What is it? Thousands of people.
Yeah, I think they had 3,000 or 4,000 people up there.
When it opened first in 1961, they all came together on that big span.
Mm-hmm.
And there was music, and Cathedral School and Denfield School played the Star Spangled Banner together. And
I know, it was pretty amazing. And I thought, would I have had the nerve to walk up that bridge? I don't know. And what people don't know about the bridge, because it's been so many years since these things have been done, but when it first opened, there was a very small median between the 4 lanes.
Oh.
It was very small. So they had a lot of trouble in the beginning of people like drifting over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's eventually they built it up. But the other thing was that it was just railings on the sides.
Oh, they didn't have the concrete
They
bunkers.
didn't have them. And they said tourists from out of town would sometimes almost stop on the bridge because they were looking at the sights. So they had to do something about that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even now, there's sometimes I drive over the bridge, and if the water looks particularly beautiful, I'm like looking at that instead of the road because it looks so nice. But one day I drove over and there was a motorcycle in front of me and he was taking selfies. I thought, well, this is probably not the place to be doing that.
No, definitely. Now, have you ever walked across like the Bong Bridge?
I actually raced across it in my running days.
Did you?
They used to have that race in honor of Dick Bong.
Mm-hmm.
I still have my shirt.
Could you feel any sway when you were up
I
on the
didn't
bridge?
really think about it.
That's probably better.
I can feel it driving over the Blatnik Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel your car move because of the wind, and I wouldn't want to be up there when it's 70 miles an hour blowing off the lake there.
Definitely not. The Bong's more sheltered, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like it is. No. I love the Blatnik Bridge, though. I'm going to be sad to see it go down. Let's see what kind of design they come up with.
Hopefully it's as beautiful as the
It really
current
is a beautiful bridge. I mean, I've gone on a boat underneath it, and you look up and I thought, why is this such a beautiful picture? But it really is from underneath. And then when you see it, I can't imagine the harbor without the bridge. But, initially they tried to get another aerial lift bridge in the harbor. They wanted it when they were talking about building a replacement for the interstate in the 1930s. That was one of the ideas. And the other one was they wanted it where the Arrowhead Bridge was, where the Bong is now. They wanted another aerial lift bridge there. And I thought, I think one makes it special. Two, it probably wouldn't be as special.
Right. The logistics of that would
I
be
know.
much more difficult because
I
that's
know.
a longer span.
I know. And even when they were building the Bong, that's why it's so curved, because they have to get it right in the channel. They have to get placement right for when the boats can come through the channel there.
Oh, I didn't realize that to deal with the
that was
currents.
the curve. So that's why they had that.
Interesting.
I know.
Was the design process more difficult then because of that for the Bong?
I don't know. Those guys just seem to whip them out. It was like, yeah, we're going to build a bridge. Okay. But I think they did have to think about the land placement and, where the channel was and all of that just to get it exactly right. So, it doesn't suffer the same fate as the interstate did time after time being hit by a boat because he's trying to make that way through the bridge and then be where he's supposed to be on the other side. So
did they have many accidents like that on the Arrowhead Bridge?
I don't think so.
Just the interstate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe because it went up.
Oh, instead of...
Yeah. Then you had that obstacle too when the bridge was turned that way that you had to get through that and then try to get past it. Right. I'd love to go on one of those boats though, under a bridge. You? Oh, I would. I'd love to go on an oar boat.
Okay. We'll see what you do. Awesome. But through it all, well, almost, The interstate was first, but through it all, the Oliver Bridge
Yes.
is still there.
We should salute the Oliver Bridge because it's still serving its purpose. Well, the steel plant isn't there anymore, but, railroads still travel over it.
Mhm.
So, and if we're down to one bridge, when they start building the new bridge, are a lot of people going to take that way to Duluth?
I wonder. It is way out into West Duluth, so I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that would...
It's a nice drive, though.
It is a lovely drive, but it takes more time.
It does.
So
does.
we'll see. And
Yeah.
I know the Bong Bridge also has the distinction of having the only roundabout here in Superior.
Oh, yay. I love roundabouts.
They're ubiquitous down in southern
I know.
Wisconsin,
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. Hopefully that bridge will be up to the traffic that it's going to be seeing when the Blatnik does shut
I can't
down.
imagine how much is going to go over it and what it's going to be like on Tower Avenue in Superior when that happens.
It will be interesting to document as the new bridge comes in, though.
I might just get a lawn chair and sit down there and watch them while they're building it. I think it would be kind of fun. It's
so, too.
amazing. Like, what are they going to do with the old bridge? Are they going to blow it up? And then I've got to find out these things. But I give those people credit because I, have no math or any other kind of scientific skills, but being able to design something and put it in the water like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think back in the 1950s, how different technology is nowadays, I mean, there's so many other things that you can have at your fingertips that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
But in those days, I don't know.
They were wonderful engineers.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you very much,
You're
Teddie.
welcome.
And thank you for listening to Archive Dive. New episodes are available monthly at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, email me at mlockwood@superiortelegram.com. And before we go, I just wanted to share that the Archive Dive podcast earned first place for audio storytelling in the Wisconsin Newspaper Association's Better Newspaper Contest. Thanks for listening and making it possible.